very shortly. Okay, so welcome everybody. We really appreciate you giving your time this afternoon in your very, very busy days. The session this afternoon, as you know, is going to be focusing on the EYFS 2021 and how that links in with the provision that we make for children with SEND in our settings. I appreciate looking at the people joining the session, that we've got some colleagues from preschool settings, nurseries, some colleagues from school settings. Everybody completely welcome. We totally see that you might be coming at this from slightly different perspectives. We've probably geared this more towards SENCOs from early years settings, but please do make comment, questions, and draw us back to some of the issues that you might be experiencing in your settings as well. So we welcome different perspectives. Just a little practical thing, if people can check that their microphones are on mute, and we suggest that you probably leave your cameras off during the session, but you're extremely welcome to pop it on if you have put your hand up and want to participate by making comment or question. Otherwise, please do use the chat. We will try and allow a bit of time at the end of the session for some questions and a little bit of discussion, but really what we're trying to do today is more of an information sharing session. We will see this really as the beginning of the process of working with you, and particularly in regard to children that you're supporting with SEND. And hopefully next term we could have other sessions, perhaps more on a forum type basis, where you might, having implemented some of your ideas and made a start with that EYFS 2021 curriculum, you may have more things that you wish to discuss and ideas to share. So this really is the beginning of the process, rather than the one and only opportunity that we will have to discuss this together. So please hope that you can sort of take the session in that spirit, if you like. So what we're assuming as well is that people have accessed the excellent training sessions that Nikki and Alison have offered as a team, can you still see the can you still see the presentation?
On, Jane.
It's looked like somebody else perhaps clicked on it. Apologies. Give me a second. Just going to have to find that again.
I've just got the speaker on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Lovely.
Right, I'm hoping, I do apologise. I'm not sure. It said somebody else had taken over control of the presentation, so I don't know how that happened, but I will, hopefully you'll be able to see that first slide again.
We can see it.
Okay, so
yes,
what I was just running through there was the fact that there has been some excellent training around the 2021 EYFS, and we're assuming that people have accessed that, and this is building on that really, and looking at that through the lens of how do we make provision for those children within our settings who have additional needs and might be accessing learning in a different way. So normally, as you know, Nikki, Alison and the early years team would be offering that very overarching generic training around the EYFS, and our role as area SENCOs would be a lot more focused around SEND and things related to the code of practice. But both of our teams have come together on this one because we just felt it was so important to be consistent and to coordinate our advice and approach. So hence the little picture there of getting our ducks in a row. We're trying to really make sure that we're supporting you in a consistent way. So this is the start of that process really. So what we're aiming to do this session is look at revisit a few of those key messages that will have been delivered in the training that Nikki and Alison's team has been offering out, but we want to look at it specifically around how that relates to children with SEND. We also want to think about those key things that are so central to your work as SENCOs or practitioners working with children with SEND. How do we go about making sure that we're identifying children's needs in a really timely way and the assessment related to that, looking at the planning and provision to support children's needs, and how do we monitor how children are progressing. And what I hope will come through during this session is, although there are some really key fundamental changes to the way that we will be delivering EYFS in 2021 in September, there are also some really consistent parts of your practice that we want to reinforce are very important for you to continue with, and things that you feel are working really well for you. Overarching message that I'm getting around this is, please don't stop doing things that you know are effective and that work really, really well. So we hope that we can reassure you through the session that a lot of things that you find really useful now will be absolutely fine for you to continue with, and reminding ourselves as well as we go through this that, as well as having regard obviously to the statutory framework for the EYFS, as SENCOs or practitioners working with children with SEN, we also have regard to the SEN code of practice, and so all of the messages within there about having a really sound graduated approach, etc., still remain in place. So all of that we still absolutely have to have regard to. So I'm just going to hand over to Nikki. I realise that I very rudely haven't really kind of introduced us properly, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jane Barnett from the Early Years Area SENCO Service, and as I hand to Nikki for the next couple of slides, I'll just ask her to introduce herself if that's okay.
Hello everyone, my name's Nikki Difford. I'm part of the Early Years team. My responsibility is around training, quality and participation, and as Jane said, you know, we do link with the area SENCOs very much, because again it's another support mechanism for yourselves, isn't it? So again, we do talk between the two teams. And again, as Jane said, some of you would have seen these slides before if you've come along to any of our training. We do mix and match, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel either. So actually we want to give that consistent message. So the key changes, there is more depth to the educational programmes in the EYFS framework. And again, if you haven't had a chance to look at that, again, I advise you and your team to read through those areas and developments of learning, because actually it gives you really good ideas in there and what you need to include in your curriculum or your curriculum goals, long-term plans. It does focus on early language and extended vocabulary across all education programmes, and it says that right at the beginning. It says the development of children's spoken language underpins all areas of learning and development. So again, that focus needs to be threaded through whatever curriculum that you do, and again, like Jane said, it's for all children. There is a new development matters that both supports and complements the new EYFS and the new educational programmes, and again, this is guidance, so that is your support tool. Your EYFS is a must, your development matters is a guidance. You know, you've got only emerging or expected at the end of EYFS. You are still expected to identify the more able children and support them to excel, but you just don't have to record. And it's like anything, isn't it? Any transition from nursery into school, we're hoping that you talk to those reception teachers, and those reception teachers will talk to year 1. And again, talk about all the children, and especially those that need support. ELG, so the early learning goals, they're clearer, they're in bullet point form, but again, this is for presentation. But again, it remains the best fit judgment. So again, it goes back to you knowing your children, knowing that child development. And the characteristics of effective teaching and learning, they are still there, but they've just removed the statutory requirement to report on them. So staff, again, need to be aware of these. You know, they're a great tool to be used when actually you're talking to Ofsted, showing that you know your children. And again, within development matters, it goes into depth around these characteristics. And again, these changes allow practitioners to review, they allow them to take stock. It's look at what you want to change. And again, you've got lots of things in practice that work really well for you. And again, if they work really well, then don't throw them away. But you might want to look at your documentation, your processes, you know, your resources, your environment. But all of this goes back to that in-depth learning, you know, working and developing on what children know and supporting those children. So that's what we can't lose. And I think Jane's right, you know, about revisiting this in different ways just gives us a little bit more confidence when we come to use all this. Next slide, please. And again, this hasn't changed. The key messages within the revised EYFS are still the same. You know, the EYFS sets the standards that all early years providers must, so it is a statutory requirement, we must meet to ensure children learn and develop well and are kept healthy and safe. And it promotes teaching and learning to ensure children's school readiness. Again, not a word that I like. I think it's about that lifelong journey for me, because we're not just setting them up for school, we're setting them up for life. So again, it's going through that, but they're all there, aren't they? You know, the quality and consistency in all early years settings. And Jane's very kindly highlighted that, you know, it's every child makes good progress. No child is left behind. We have that secure foundation through planning for the learning and development of each individual child and assessing and reviewing what they have learned regularly. And again, this links to requirements for learning and development, which must shape activities and experiences for all children in early year settings. Partnership working between practitioners and with parents and carers, that's always been a must. And we all know that it stems to that, you know, good relationships with parents, also good relationships with children, working together to support that child. And then, of course, equality of opportunity and anti-discriminatory practice, ensuring that every child is included and supported. And these link to those overarching principles. And again, how these relate to children with SEND. You have that unique child, you know, recognises the different ways that children learn and develop and reminds us of the individual approach we need to take, you know, to APDR, particularly for children with SEND again. You know, that hasn't gone out of this message. Those messages are still the same. Those positive relationships relates to the central importance of the partnership. The biggest one with the changes and the tweaks are enabling environments with teaching and support from adults. So that pedagogy, you know, it reminds us the importance of considering different children's needs when planning our learning environments, e.g. considering accessibility. And I know that some of, especially, you know, children settings that have a lot of children with, you know, SEND, they're looking at how they work their curricular goals to look at that within their environment and what the adults can do to support that. And then you've got learning and development. And again, that links to the unique child, the need for individualized approach, recognizing those different learning styles, and also recognizing that resources might be a little bit different. The environment might need to be adapted. So again, everything involved around this is that pedagogy, and it's about the staff.
Thank you, Nikki. And I really think that what I find so reassuring about those elements that we've highlighted there is the fact that it really resonates so well for the way that we approach our work as SENCOs in early year settings. And I think that partnership working is one that I think, particularly if you've been on our SENCO training, you'll know that we talk about partnership in such a broad sense with all of the outside professionals that you might be working with, as well as with practitioners within your setting and with parents, carers. So I find those key messages so reassuring from a sort of SENCO perspective, because it really does chime with the way that we have always worked. And like Nikki referred to on the previous slide, that kind of depth of learning, which I know we'll talk about a bit more on some of the slides to follow, I think that really allows us that freedom, if you like, to revisit things where they need to be revisited and to make sure that children have got that really deep understanding they need before we move them on to next steps, if you like. So these this learning and development considerations little paragraph, I'll give you a second or two to read through that. That comes from the new framework. But I think as SENCOs, you would certainly recognise this being a huge part of the way that we have always worked, you know, looking out that early identification for any concerns that we see, particularly in those prime areas, and needing to consider whether that requires any specialist support. It could be something initially within the setting at SEND support, it could be something outside of the setting, and then it just reinforces those links that we make with other agencies audiences as necessary, and completely fits in obviously with the SEN code of practice, and completely fits in, I would suggest, with the way that you have all been working, you know, and what we see on a day-to-day basis when we have contact with settings. So we've really put these first few slides in just to kind of reassure you that key messages are very, very much the same. When you think about those things that you might use currently to help you to identify any areas of concern, or once you have perhaps got a few suspicions that you might want to look at exploring in a bit more depth, that a child might be having some difficulties in a particular area, I just wondered if you could use the chat for a couple of minutes and pop in any of the tools that you currently use in your setting, any of the documents or things that you might have to hand that you use when you are really exploring in a bit more detail and making those early assessments around different aspects of need, for example, communication, or children who might be having difficulty regulating their emotions, etc. Any ideas in the chat there of things that you are currently using, any materials? Yeah, somebody's popped in there about the ITS file, the fact file that I will always call them ITS as well, but they are now Children and Young People's Therapy Services. That's the combined occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and speech and language. And certainly that has got some brilliant ideas, and I know that it's right in the throes of being updated at the moment. When I last spoke to Camilla Hutchins, who heads that service, so watch this space, there should be an updated version of that. The ECAT, I know that lots of settings use incredibly effectively, the Every Child a Talker monitoring form, and that still does have the reference to those age ranges that have been actually now taken from Development Matters, the revised version, but there's nothing that's come through yet to replace that as such, and it's a highly valued form by our speech and language therapy colleagues. So we would totally give you the message to keep going with that, to use that. Some settings use it with all of their children, and some just use it when they've got some concerns, but it's still going to be really valuable, particularly if you're making a referral. So please do keep using that if you find it useful. And someone else has popped in there about the helpline. I know that that's very highly thought of and operates during the morning. I think it's all but one day, and I can't remember which day it's not on, but you can Google that on the Children and Young People's Therapy Service website. So that's another tool that you've got, if you like, in your toolbox, where you can have discussions with therapists around whether you perhaps need to make a referral, or if there's anything else that you can do regarding sort of moving those children forward. So I've got a few suggestions in here. The autism community, is that the AET stuff we're talking about? On the AET website, I know there are some really good resources, a framework there for assessment for children who either have a diagnosis of autism or will, you know, perhaps be heading that way because of their social communication needs. There are thank you. There's somebody popped in there about the times for the helpline there. I'm just wondering if I can ask Chelsea to tell us a little bit about the things that she's popped on. Is it Chelsea and Amy? Sorry, the chat's moving up so rapidly, I'm losing that. Some of the things you popped in there around ADHD, etc.
Hello, sorry. I don't really know too much about them. I'm only aware of them because the Senko has mentioned them to me, about things that we have available at the school, really.
Okay. So is that the Boxall? I'm just trying to make sure I'm not saying the wrong thing there. So I thought I'd give you the opportunity to tell me what they were.
Yes, sorry. So it's the Boxalls, and then the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaires. And then the Nelly is a new speech and language thing that we're taking on.
Yes. Yeah. I think some of the tools there might sort of tip over more into those school-age children, but are incredibly relevant and useful for looking in a bit more detail. All of these things that you're popping in here, what we're saying is please continue to use the things that you find really useful. The communication profiles, for example, and the passports that you might use if you've been involved with the the inclusive communication training. They certainly would be very relevant for particularly our early years children, and where you found them useful and been able to sort of share them with parents to get that nice 360 view of how a child's communication is developing. Please don't feel that because we're working with a revised curriculum that these materials are no longer useful. And I think that was one of our key messages that we wanted to give today. It's nice to see the range of things that people are using. Thank you so much to Kiri and Karen popping in some links there for you. The advice line there, just reinforcing what we were saying about the times that's open, and the Autism Education Trust. That's a really useful website to visit with free downloadable resources on there for children that may or may not actually have a diagnosis. Yeah, the developmental journal, thank you. I'm pleased you mentioned that one because we've got a couple of slides coming up around that specifically. That's used in a lot of different contexts, which we'll discuss a bit later. And, our overarching message about a lot of these materials, even though they may have links with the previous EYFS, we feel that they are, very sound, very clear in their sort of developmental stages, and still remain to be really good tools. So our message to you at this moment is to carry on using them if you find them useful. Okay. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but what we're trying to demonstrate here for you really is how the key messages between the EYFS framework and the SEND Code of Practice are exactly the same. As you can see at the top there, the single statement from the framework is around the fact that providers must, and that is a must, have arrangements in place to support children with SEND or disabilities. And as you'll see, that exact same sentence is from the SEND Code of Practice underneath. So very, very clear that there's no change there, and obviously a bit more detail in that Code of Practice quote there, because it's giving you the kind of process, if you like, around early identification and that partnership working, etc., that we've described. But I think it's reassuring to see that those consistent messages around how we work with children with SEND are absolutely still there, and they haven't changed. So there's still an expectation that you will be following that graduated response that's kind of outlined in the Code of Practice, and nothing significant has changed there. So I'm going to hand you back now to Nikki, who's going to run through a few more slides around, starting off with the characteristics of effective learning.
Thanks, Jane. And again, like Jane said, these haven't changed. They put teaching in there, but that links to the Ofsted definition of teaching. And if you haven't had a chance to read through that, again, it's another handout that's really useful. It's on our EYFS reforms page, which I'll put in the chat once Jane comes back on to do the slides. And again, the whole point of characteristics of effective teaching and learning is in planning and guiding what children learn. Practitioners must reflect on the different rates at which children are developing and adjust their practice appropriately. And again, we've all talked about unique children, but again, we need to understand the importance of observation to understand children's starting points, their learning style and their interest to inform your planning. And again, that individuality of children. And again, Jane mentioned it was the in-depth learning. So focus on the depth of knowledge, so not rushing them on to the next steps. And that's the one thing about the EYFS, it goes into when you do your long-term planning or your curriculum planning, it's about practicing, revisiting those activities that you do maybe in a different way. And again, you all know the characteristics of effective teaching and learning. I'm not going to go into depth with them. You've got playing, exploring, you've got active learning, creating and thinking critically. If you've got new staff that are coming in that haven't got maybe the understanding, and again, the development matters, they've got 3 pages on this, and they've also got ideas of what you do to support those characteristics of effective learning. And also Joe Sawyer from our team did a whole training session on revisiting the characteristics, and again, that's on the YouTube channel that Jane mentioned earlier on. And if you go to the EYFS reforms page, the link is there. And again, this links into something that Sarah Quinn, who's an early years consultant, and she wrote a few articles and she did some training around fewer things in greater depth. And that is what we mean by that in-depth learning. You know, she's saying do not plan too much content. You need to make sure your planning sits in line with your children, because actually it's no good planning something and actually nobody is interested. The children won't learn. So again, it's planning from your children's interest, planning from what you know that we need to repractice. You know, try to vary your delivery, because actually one child might want to play with the activity but doesn't like getting their hands dirty. They might have sensory deprivation or whatever. So again, how are you going to do that differently? Rehearsal strengthens memory through a process called consolidation. So again, it's that practicing over and over. You don't have to have it out 3 days in a row and everybody gets bored with it. You might introduce it, let them have it for one session, you might bring it out 3 sessions later. And again, remember children attend different times as well. The rehearsal strengthens and stabilizes the connections of neurons over days, weeks, months, and years. So again, putting it out in a different way, or even just adding different resources to that piece of equipment. So if you have Play-Doh out, and you do this anyway, we know you do, you know, you might add different equipment the next day. You might bring something totally different in. You might bring a different colour Play-Doh in, which changes the whole dynamics. Practitioners must constantly check for understanding while information is being processed in the children's working memory to make sure it's complete and accurate. And again, we know that children learn at different rates. We also know there's a progress to learning, especially in maths. You know, so when you're looking at those progression skills, you know, you need to think about that with maths. They can't miss a step because it will have an impact later on. So again, revisit that with your staff. Have we done enough of practicing 1 to 3 numbers, or do we need to go back to that a little bit more? Do we need to bring rhymes more and different things? And we must be consistent in trying to help children make links in their learning. And again, this links into the theories of the past, like Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, looks into Bruner's, and it links into the scaffolding. And if you're up on the 7 key features and develop matters, it talks about scaffolding children's learning. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, I think, later on. But again, all we can say, it goes back to that in-depth learning for those children. Next slide, please. So again, development matters and the curriculum. Hopefully you've been on the training, as I said before. If not, please have a recap. This isn't anything new. You know, we are just make sure that you are revisiting that information. So development matters. As I said before, it is a guidance, but it does not replace professional judgment. So again, you need to use that as a tool to support you when your through your observations and your assessment of children. The curriculum is a top level plan of everything the early years setting wants the children to learn. And that's the biggest thing to remember, is what you want the children to learn. And then you break that down into your medium plans, your everyday plans. The curriculum needs to be ambitious. You have to have careful sequencing, which will help children to build their learning over time. So going back to that previous slide, that in-depth learning, and also give plenty of time and repetition to allow children to learn. You know, young children's learning is often driven by their interests. So again, plans need to be flexible. You know, we talked about that in the previous slides. Children do not always learn the same way. Activities may need to be presented differently. Babies and young children do not develop in a fixed way. We all know that everyone learns at different rates. And again, we talk about when babies learn, it's not linear. It's more like a spider's web. They'll go off and do this bit for a while, and then they'll go that way, and then they go that way. So again, make sure your plans are flexible to adapt that. And depth in early learning is more important than covering lots of things in a superficial way. And I think as we go through ourselves and through learning journeys, we have to recap on things. We have to go back and think, oh, actually, how did I do that? And we need to give children time to do that. And the biggest message we can say at the moment is, you know, we're not giving out curriculum guidelines. We're not saying to you, use this curriculum, use that one, because we know that one size curriculum does not fit all. So again, look at what you have in place, work with what you already have in place, keep what works well for you, and maybe tweak, change what doesn't. But again, this is a whole team approach, and you have to be really careful when you're saying, oh, this is our curriculum, that everyone is aware of that, because Ofsted will ask you and they will look at that. Next slide, please. So again, curriculum considerations for children with SEND. These are questions that you need to be asking yourself. I would turn these into reflective questions. You know, the first one, curricular goals, are they inclusive? You know, you need to look at how children with SEND will achieve these. What support and scaffolding will be needed? And that scaffolding is really important. You know, it's about helping those children with those small steps to help them move on. You know, area SENCOs are likely to ask the settings for their curricular goals so that you can have that discussion when you're looking at outcomes for those children. Now, you may have a curriculum plan, you might call it a long-term plan. You know, we all call them something different, but you need to have that aim at the top, what you want children to learn, and then you break them down into those depths of learning. So it's emphasising on ensuring children have opportunities to explore fewer things, but in greater depth to increase their understanding. You know, so think an example here is, you know, you watch a serial on TV, you watch episode 1, then you miss episode 2, 3, and then you try to re-engage with episode 4. And sometimes it doesn't happen, does it? Sometimes you have to go back and binge watch those things, don't you? So again, it's going back and thinking, actually, has that child got that? Yes, a little bit. I don't think it has. How else can we do that to reinforce that learning? And again, scaffolding rather than differentiation. Again, in its differentiation down, you know, so again, it's supporting that child. You know, it's about like, you know, putting on a coat. And this is where you need to talk to your parents, because we all know it's easier to put that coat on the child, but we're not empowering that child. And it might be just even small steps of actually making sure that the, you know, the sleeves are the right side out. So you're not confusing from the beginning, but it's just giving them those small steps to then support them to go to the next level. Then they might need that small step to go to the next level. And then we talk about skills progression. Again, links to backward chaining and loops of learning. And again, we're going to talk about that on the next slide, but we need to make sure that that curriculum is ambitious. You know, it is flexible. You know, the effective curriculum framework supports practitioners to think clearly about their pedagogical aims. And that is about how. So your curriculum is here. How are your staff going to support that? And that's what we've got to look at, is that how, what activities are you going to offer? How is the environment supporting those children? You know, and it ensures that practitioners are mindful of children's progression. It can focus their attention and observation on the most important aspects of children's development. So again, this links into our staff training. You know, you will need to ensure that staff share understanding of the curricular goals in your setting. They need to know what planning is in place. They need to know their children, and they're confident in their knowledge of child development. So again, it might be you're thinking, actually, maybe we need to do something on that. You know, do some bite-sized learning, 10 minutes, maybe just around, you know, the curriculum. I was going to say that it's communication language. So actually, do we know the progression of curriculum and language, communication language? So again, find those resources, and I've got some wonderful resources on that, and they're free. And we talked about skills progression, and if Jane pops the next slide. There we are. This, too far. One back, please. Thank you very much. So again, this is a progression document, and it's shared by Julian Grenier inside the Secret Garden, his blog, and he's got lots of wonderful bits on there about curricular goals and different things. But again, I think there's 8 of these, and they're shared from Becky Wigmore from her school, and they decided that they thought the curriculum was a great idea, but actually they need to go back a step. And the step was that they need to look at progression. So they've developed these progression documents that are there for staff. So again, they'd be in your staff room, and it just again prompts, you know, that children have to go through those stages. You know, you start, don't you, with those 2 hands to open and close the scissors, and then an adult supports. So again, it's really worth, again, talking to your staff. Do they understand what progression is? What children do? And I know I've seen them on there with pencil control and mark making. I've seen those in settings. So again, all of those link into staff development. Next slide. And if you've come onto our communication and language training, you will know this slide, you will see this. But again, it's something that makes you think just a bit about outside the box. And again, it comes from Sheringham Nursery School, which again, Julian Grenier heads up. but he put this together with a curriculum and assessment policy. Now, if you've been in early years as long as I have, when we started, we had those overviews about curriculum and language, and we put spider webs off, and it's into core books, it's into our lunchtime, it's into our shared story time, it's into this and it's into that, because actually we know that those areas of learning just don't sit in one thing. So the blue circle, that depicts the curriculum overview, which links everything you are aware that your educational programme, your curriculum, must involve. So these are activities and experience for children are set out under each area of learning. And then you've got the green circle, which is your environment, it's your resources, it's your staff, routines, your continuous provision, which links into everything. So again, it's your planning, assessment of that enabling environment, even, including the inert. So again, when we look at those rectangular boxes, which links both of those, the curriculum overview and your environment, continuous provision. So teaching and learning based on children's interest. So again, this is all aspect of the curriculum requires practitioners to be flexible and to take into account of children's interest. And I also, when I include that, I do put needs in there as well. These are your activities. So they're both planned, spontaneous. It includes the implementation. Your staff, how are you going to do this? That adult role. And again, you would revisit these regularly. You'd adapt the planning to suit the children's needs, their individual needs. And you would have that discussion, wouldn't you, at your staff meetings, at the, in the morning, you might say, well, so-and-so's coming in, we've got this in, actually, let's adapt that to make sure. So it's those regular conversations between the staff. And then you've got a regular cycle of learning. So your curriculum will be a progress model. We've discussed that. It's about progression from one area of learning to the next, a bit like the next steps, but it's how they're going to get to that next level. We need to remember when we are building on children's interest, we are planning to broaden and deepen those interests. So the progress model links to points 2, 3, and 4. So again, we all have the core books. So we have a regular cycle of learning. So again, that's your, your plans and everything else, but then you will have specific things in that, which I like to call the enhanced learning. So you all have core books, rhymes and songs, every setting has got that. B, we put a forest school. You might not have a forest school, but you might have regular cooking activities. You might have a regular gardening program that you've got. So again, that would go in that, because again, that is enhanced learning for those children. Trips to and having visited him, we know, especially around language and understanding the world, that brings in that all wonder, that cultural capital. And again, it doesn't have to be trips to, big famous places. It could be your local park, it could be your church. So again, look at what you've got around you. Again, look at that continuous provision. And you might have core experiences that you do year after year, growing beans, looking after ducklings, you might have a butterfly farm, etc. But we need to think about those. And again, the other key points, and then they link into your curricular goals for your children, so that higher level. So all of those fit into that. Your curriculum is not just your activities that you plan. It could be your snack time, it could be your lunch time, because when you think of the language that comes into that. So again, but also we need to remember most learning is play-based, both indoors and outdoors. There is a balance between adult initiated experiences, so that guided learning, and child initiated experience. And we do know as children get older, they need that guided learning. We also know that children from disadvantaged backgrounds benefit better from guided learning, because they might not have that guided learning in their home learning environment. So again, you have to think about that when you're looking at your planning. Adults take children's interests and strengths as their starting point, seeing each child as a competent learner and as an individual learner. Parents' involvement is crucial. So, Jane mentioned that. And again, it's looking to that home learning environment. And what support can you offer? What is needed in this area? And again, all of this needs to link to your demographics, because again, that has an impact on maybe what your specific area of learning is. So again, you do need to think about these. And then you need to link the 3 I's into this. And you all know those, So again, you need to make sure that's implemented within this. Next slide. Oh, there you are. The intent, implementation, impact came up at the bottom. And then, you know, I'm not going to go into depth about this because you will have all hopefully made a start on what your curriculum is. The reason we put 2 up there is there's 2 examples. One, the first one is a nursery example who have developed curricular goals for each area of their learning. So they've done a goal under each area. So up there, we've got communication language, and then we've got literacy. You know, what I would say is you need to be sure, that they can be assessed. Before, we used to have under literacy, develop a love of lifelong learning. That can't be assessed because actually lifelong learning is throughout their life, and you're not going to hopefully see them when they're 50, 60, 70 and 80, you know, to know if they've got that love life. But actually enjoy sharing and interacting with stories is something that you can measure, you know, to effectively communicate their wants and needs. Again, that could be verbally, non-verbally. So again, it's looking at those goals and making sure they're realistic for all children in your setting. And then we've got Julian Grenier's, and I'm hoping a lot of you have been made aware of these now. And I'll be honest with you, when I first looked at these goals, I'm thinking, what do you mean follow a recipe to make a bread roll? Not all children are going to be capable of that. But when you break those down, he has included all areas of learning within those goals. So for example, settle in and become a confident learner. You know, he talks about in that first milestone, children grow in confidence, their involvement in nursery activity deepens, they explore a wider range of activities, they play for longer periods of time. So that allows all children to participate in that. They might do it at different stages and they might need more practice, but at the end of the day, it's about interaction. So again, that interaction could be verbally, non-verbally. You know, follow a recipe to make a bread roll. You know, that's all point of using those utensils, using the sensory, because he starts off with, you know, just a mud tough spot tray with lots of sensory sand and a bit of mud and whatever, just to involve them in that. And then he goes into using those utensils, supporting the fine motor control practice for using writing implements, literacy, using a recipe card, again, back to literacy. You know, use of adults' language when explaining the recipe and method, you know, but again, both of these are progression models. It's how you get there, because if you look at the bottom one of each one, communicate using meaningful marks and write the first 2 letters of your name, they need to start with using muscles in their arms and hands to make those big movements, you know, building up large and fine motor skills. That is the progression to get to the end goal. So again, that's what we need to think about. How you do it is entirely up to you. And as long as you can prove it's a progression model, then that's great. And it works for you, but it has to work for you. Next slide.
I can just quickly interject there, Nikki, if you don't mind, to say that I know in some of the discussions I've had with settings where they have a lot of children, or even the majority of children with significant needs, the curricular goals really need to be thought through in terms of their, you know, how inclusive they are and how achievable they are. So we mustn't lose that ambition, must we? But we've got to also, as you say, sort of look upon it in that progression model. And I know that when we were talking in discussion, when we delivered this training earlier in the week, there was quite a lot of affinity with the examples there given in the green box, and how they could be adapted to some of the settings goals that were already in place for those settings where the majority of children, or a high percentage of children, were learning at a different rate or in a different way to a lot of their peers. So I think what this curriculum change gives us is much more freedom, much more flexibility, and much more opportunity, if you like, to really think deeply about our cohort of children, doesn't it? And to kind of come up with those goals and that work for you as a setting. And I think totally echo what you said earlier about that is why it isn't possible to just say, look, here you are, here are your eight goals, or whatever it might be. But I think it's so useful, isn't it, to see different examples, a range of different things out there, so that you can kind of see which ones resonate with you and which ones feel like they would work for your cohort.
Definitely, and definitely liaise with other settings. You know, I had one sent to me this week, some long-term plans, and it, you know, their physical development was actually to use the large equipment confidently. Because they said we have a lot of children that need support with that. So actually it was an overarching theme, but actually it doesn't matter if they can just get up the steps, or we need to help them up to the top, but they can get down the side, you know. So again, like Jane said, they have thought about that.
And I think, bearing in mind you'll be sharing these goals with parents, if there are some on there that would work for the majority of children, that some children might always need some higher level of adult support or scaffolding with, you know, have thoughts around that, so that you're able to talk sensitively with parents around what that would look like. I'm just looking on there to see about riding a balance bike, which we know for some children would never independently perhaps be a possibility. But if that were one of your curricular goals, how would you look upon that for that child who might have those physical needs and find that difficult? What would be, you know, would you have an adaptive trike available? Would you have something that would have give them the opportunity to participate as closely as possibly to their peers? And I think it's that type of conversation you would be having with your colleagues in your team group, and then, you know, having with parents as and when you're sharing these goals, hopefully with them. Definitely. I'm just going to move us on then, Nikki, to the next slide. Fine.
So assessment. So again, there's three principles to a guide settings as assessment is reviewed. And again, these come from the EYFS. So you need to look, again, we're going to keep saying this at every training you come to, you need to decide what works for you, for the setting as a team, and you need to involve. So you need to review what you are doing and keep doing the things which works well for you. Choose the right tools for the job. So again, what works best for the setting? Just because you closely liaise with another setting and they use this, it might not work for you. And again, stop doing which does nothing to improve children's care and learning. You know, no setting should stop using assessment in ways which work for them. We must not throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, the difference is, what you can't do now is we can't use those ages and stages as a general assessment tool. You know, for some children you will need to look, and some of you mentioned the individual development journals that you need to use, because they've got the small steps in them. But you need to be aware of your professional judgment. You need to be aware of the, you know, the development of children. So again, that's what you need to focus on. And again, we know things are changing. Dr. Helen Edwards from Tapestry, they've looked at their online journals, and they've put our approach to observation assessment embraces the new development matters, is that the focus is less on tracking children's knowledge and skills and more on identifying and describing the unique learning journey. And again, if you've still got Tapestry, the bit you don't use is maybe the tracking, because it is a good tool to, you know, relate that partnership with parents, share, you know, what the children are doing, look at those wow moments and observations. But maybe it's the tracking you don't need. So maybe you think, well, actually, we'll just click that off, but use all the other parts of it. But you just need to think about that. And again, you know, you need to have a secure knowledge of child development. We need to understand the features of effective pedagogy. We need to judge when to get involved and when to encourage, knowing how to scaffold children's learning, so we support them to keep trying without over helping them. This is frankly going to be a big challenge for us, because actually we're so used to doing it, and we're so parents are used to doing it, and we need to go back to them and say, look, actually this is what we're doing at nursery, this is how we're supporting them. If you could have the same approach at home, you know. And we just need to make sure that our staff are aware of this, and they need to know what you're doing. You know, so again, time has gone down. When we first started this, you had 4.5 months to get ready. Now you have about 1.5 months to get ready. So again, my thought now is look at what you're doing and talk to your staff and make sure they're all aware of what you are doing to support all those children. And I'm going to hand you back over to Jane.
Okay, so we've been giving you there some sort of overarching messages that are going out in the training that is being delivered by Nikki and Alison's team around the changes in the broader sense, but we've been hopefully linking them in as far as possible to how they really resonate well for children who might be learning and working at slightly different pace or different level to some of their peers. We're going to look more specifically now at assessment for children with SEND, and just really think about what we need to be bearing in mind when we're working in this area. And I think one of the key messages that came through to me when I was listening to Julian Grenier talking at the Early Years Conference was around the fact that although we are talking about the reduction in the amount of assessment that we'd be expecting settings to do in terms of those paperwork observations that seem to be sort of happening at the expense of spending time with the children at some times, what the message was coming through strongly around was that for those children who are struggling a bit with their learning, that's where we should be focusing our assessment work with those children. So we will inevitably do more monitoring and assessment with those children for whom we have some concerns around, because we will be needing to make sure that we really understand what their needs are and how we are going to be able to put some timely support in for them. So it's not, it's something that we need to be aware is a higher focus, if you like, for those children who are having difficulties in whatever area of their learning and development. So assessments, may need to focus on that child's specific area of need. I mean, that's quite obvious in a way. If you think about it, if their needs are around their communication and language, then we would be using the tools that we know work well to focus in and to gather a really, really clear picture of what that child's needs are, because that obviously helps us with our planning and that individual planning that will still be expected for those children that are working at a different rate. Other professionals may well contribute to that assessment. You could see a report or a care plan coming through, for example, from a therapist. You could see something from a paediatrician. So we will be pulling together wider assessments for those children, not just ones within the setting. And once again, this is nothing new. This is how we work, so this hopefully will be reassuring to you. We always need to be referring back still to the SEND code, and that is very clear that we've got to be considering all information about children's learning and development from both within the setting and beyond, and then where appropriate, we'll be seeking that specialist advice. And as you know, increasingly, children within early years are having that more formal statutory assessment, the EHCP. And so that very much involves that much broader sweep, if you like, looking at children's needs from lots of different perspectives. Having said that, often assessment happens in the moment, that day to day, that moment where you notice something that's changed, where that might cause you to alter slightly the way that you offer the next activity to the child, or something that you might get out by way of resources that you think, oh, this could work now. Now that very in the moment, day-to-day small assessment, we might have felt the need in the past to rush off and make a note of that and date it and put it against some tracker, whereas the message clearly now is there's not the expectation that every single thing that the child is doing is written down and monitored. Some of those in the moment assessments need not be recorded. But I think what we will need to be aware of is there will inevitably be more assessment around those children with SEND, as there always has been, I would suggest. And equally with the planning, we do talk, don't we, when we think of the code of practice, around those children requiring something that's additional to or different from their peers, and that hasn't changed. So that will still mean that for our children where we have some concerns about their learning, we will always be needing to do that little bit extra just to really make sure that we've got a clear focus on that. So just really to sort of reinforce what we've just been saying there, with your formative assessment. This is a little quote there from the framework, and it's very clear that you will be using your own professional judgment very much more probably than perhaps people felt that they were maybe able to do in the past, where they were looking back at the kind of developmental stages that were much more prescriptive in development matters. But what we're hoping, as Nikki was saying earlier, that people will really feel confident within their staff team around their knowledge of of child development and their knowledge of those individual children, you know, in their key group, etc. And so that will help you to be able to draw on that when you're making those judgments in terms of which way that child's learning will be going next. It's not so much around that huge collection of physical evidence, those huge files and folders. And I think what I noticed at the I think it was the earliest conference, Nikki, where we had somebody from Ofsted who came to speak, and they were very clear that that was not what they would be looking for when they made visits, I think. And although we're not doing everything we're doing for Ofsted, clearly we take a steer from what their recommendations are. Sorry, excuse me. So I think that, you know, that should be reassuring. But I think for those children with SEND, again, there will be those additional things that you will keep by way of paperwork that will always be good practice, that individual planning and those reviews of the child's learning, which will help inform their sort of next steps, if you like. Those will still remain really important and central to our work for children with SEN. Sorry, my throat's decided to pick this moment to get a tickle. So materials that are there to support you, as we've referenced development matters, we've got some slides coming up that will cover some of these materials, but the development matters has been revised in line with the 2021 EYFS, and what I would draw your attention to there, particularly when you're planning for children with SEND, or indeed you're looking to identify whether children might have needs in a particular area, is there are those checkpoints now within that development matters document that give you some real clear steers around those areas where you would need to be concerned if you weren't seeing particular things at particular ages and stages. So please be mindful of those, make sure your staff team are aware of them. They're not to be used as a tick list, but they are sort of reminders, flags, checkpoints, as they're called, to make sure that we don't miss any key sort of evidence, if you like, of children perhaps falling a bit behind where they should be. The other document we want to draw your attention to is Birth to 5 Matters, and we've got a slide coming up around that. But that, you know, you're probably aware, has been revised recently in the light of the 2021 EYFS, and that is a nationally produced document that does relate back to some more of those ages and stages, perhaps a bit more than is in the true spirit of the EYFS, but nevertheless we are still recommending that practitioners look at that, because it's got some really clear ideas of things that you might be able to draw on for your planning, and certainly when it comes to assessment, it gives you some you know, best fit models that you can use in terms of seeing that children are making progress through the different phases that are described within there. So it's still a useful tool that you can be aware of. The one that we've referenced already earlier, particularly around those children with more complex needs, the children we describe as having high needs, we would certainly still be recommending the Early Support Developmental Journal, and we've got a little bit more info about that in a minute. Other things on the slide there, we've mentioned them already. I think the communication profiles that we very much still recommend through our inclusive communication training. Alongside that, there are the passports that people make for children to describe, you know, sort of how they effectively communicate with others and what their sort of interests and likes and dislikes are. We really think that approach remains incredibly relevant and useful still. Other materials there we've mentioned, but the what to expect when, I understand that was revisited in 2019, and that's the document that was aimed more towards parents, giving them that overview of the EYFS. And we still think that's a really relevant document to support some of those conversations that you might have with parents. If you're having those sensitive initial conversations, looking at areas where you've noticed children's learning might not be progressing in the same way as some of their peers, what you've got within that document are some descriptions of what you might expect and at the different stages of child's development, and it helps you to open up those conversations with families to sort of say, have you noticed this? We've observed this within the setting. We still think that that document is a useful one. So a bit like the quote that Nikki mentioned earlier, it is like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, don't stop using things that you know to be useful. All of these things up on the slide there, probably with the exception of maybe the first two, we imagine will either evolve, change, possibly be replaced over time with other things as this curriculum EYFS becomes more embedded. And certainly with you, what we'd like to do is explore, as you have implemented this curriculum in the autumn term, and we perhaps regroup a little way into that term. We want to know, what is working well with you, or do some of these documents really not fit with your new approaches, and are there other things that you found work well, and having that forum perhaps to share some of those ideas we hope would be really useful. But at this point in time, we are still saying that we think the the documents that you're effectively using now will be absolutely appropriate to continue using into the foreseeable future. I'm hoping to move that forward. Ooh.
Yeah.
Has that moved, Nikki? Yeah. Okay.
So again, this is just a recap. I'm hoping that you've all had a chance even to read through it and realise that
Sorry.
Oh,
sorry. that was like a delay. That was like a delay on my computer. I clicked it twice by mistake, and there we go.
There we are. So it is shorter.
I will never not touch it again. Sorry.
It's a 90-minute read. So, it's a lot shorter than the old development. There's fewer bands. James mentioned, now the bands are births of 3, 3 and 4-year-olds and children in reception. And within those, there are those checkpoints. And like Jane, use those checkpoints just for your observation purposes. To identify if a child's not meeting those, then actually, what else do we need to do? It allows more space for professional judgment. We've talked about that all the way through this. So again, can't stress enough, your staff need to be caught up on child development. Brevity means more space to develop the right curriculum for the children you are working with. And your children. Nobody can come in and say, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, because actually you can turn around and say, well, actually, that won't suit our children. So again, it's responsibility for what children learn runs through the leadership and your staff. And again, can't say enough, Development Matters is a guidance. It's there to support you. And there's no early learning goals in the Development Matters, because actually, if you're in nursery, you shouldn't be working towards those early learning goals. You are laying the foundations within your educational programme. So when they leave you and go to school in that reception year, that's when they start using the early learning goals. And again, within that document, you've got the 7 key features of effective practice, which again gives you ideas. And Gillian Grenier has written a lovely book that goes alongside that. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can download it for free. So again, it's worth having a look at that. It's got the characteristics of effective teaching and learning. So again, it's going into detail, gives you examples, and then you've got the tables which summarise some of the pathways of children's development. So again, it's all there. They give you ideas. And then Jane mentioned the birth to 5 matters. I don't know how many of you had a chance to look at this. Again, its aim is to support practitioners to implement the EYFS. And again, it's pedagogically sound, principle and evidence-based. So again, it's a reference material. And I must admit, I downloaded it and printed it off a couple of weeks ago to have a look through. And actually, there's a lot of research in there. There's a lot of evidence-based. There's a lot of case studies. So actually, I would say if you haven't got that, download it, because it is downloadable. It's a lot to print out, so it might be that you just read it as a thing. But if you look at page 9, it's promoting the voice and inclusion. And then pages 22 and 27, there's inclusive practice and equalities. And there's a lot of information in that document. And again, James put the quote up there, is inclusion is a process of identifying, understanding and breaking down barriers to participation and belonging. Inclusive early years practice is about anticipating, paying attention, responding to and reflecting on the needs and interests of all children. And there isn't anything more important than that. I think we need to remember that.
Thank you, Nikki. And as we've mentioned a couple of times, Developmental Journal, I mean, you will be aware that this document has been widely promoted in Somerset, even though it's, you know, it's quite old now, but we don't make any apology for still recommending it, because I think the original spirit of the way it was promoted through the early support programme, which was very much around recording and celebrating those small steps of progress, that still feels so relevant and so important to the work that we do within supporting children with SEND, that it doesn't feel as if it's become out of date in any respect. We really do feel that the number of ways that it's used in Somerset, for example, through the Portage Home Visiting Service, use it to sort of look at where children are in terms of their progress. We consider the levels that are given on the Developmental Journal when we're looking at the early years higher needs audit, for example, to consider top-up funding. It's also looked at on the SEND statutory panel if we're considering a child for an education, health and care assessment. So it's giving us a lot of useful information, and the original spirit of the document was not talking in terms of those chronological ages. It was talking in terms of the step 1, step 2, totally rooted in child development. And so from that perspective, we really think that it still remains to be a useful document. So once again, I think we just need to be clear that this is something that we tend to recommend for those children that we would describe as having high needs. So we're talking about a relatively small percentage of children. But I think that where you are using it, and I know that sometimes settings only just use one strand, for example, if they're looking at a particular area of need, we would strongly recommend that you continue to use it. And we will certainly be asking for levels from that document when we're looking at things like the appropriateness of high needs funding or whether to make a statutory assessment. So it's going to be important for you to continue to use that. As we say in that bottom point there, we will review this over time. Everything is quite dynamic at the moment. Things are changing and developing. But what we feel is while we're in this transition point, moving from the previous EYFS into using the new one, there's a lot of changes afoot, lots of things to consider, not least of which things like your curricular goals, etc. It feels so important to get those established and embedded, and then we can continue to use the things we feel are supporting as well at the moment, with the idea of reviewing that in time once we've really embedded that broader curriculum. So basic messages, we still find the value in using Developmental Journal and would still be recommending that. The other thing that remains the same and very much part of a well-established process we understand for settings is that summative assessment that happens at 2, the 2-year check. You'll see that that's referenced there on the quote that's come from the revised framework, just pointing out again that that's an opportunity really to look for any emerging concerns, to make those links then with the appropriate services that might need to become involved. And as you'll know, that 2-year progress check is really a key part of that early identification that we do as part of our bread and butter work, don't we, in early years settings. But don't forget the link there with the health visitor ASQ check that happens at the age of 2 as well, or around 2.5. If you have any concerns because of the check that you have made within your setting around a child's development, obviously you're going to be talking to parents about that, and with their permission, please make sure that you're sharing that information with the child's health visitor, because that link is so important to give that complete picture of the child's development and possibly promote any follow-up that needs to happen with health colleagues, maybe a paediatric referral, maybe referral to therapy service. So it's really important that we make those links. And the format that you will have used for that 2-year check has been updated, and I understand it's now referring to whether the child is sort of on track or not so, rather than giving those developmental stages through the months as it would have done previously, but what it's what it is highlighting most specifically is where there are any concerns at all around that development, and it's that early point in the child's life when they're 2 that we hope to to pick up anything that hasn't already been noticed as early as we possibly can, so we can get that intervention in place. So that remains as it always has been. So just summarising now the last couple of slides, really, just relating back to what we said earlier in the session, that don't forget, even though we are implementing this 2021 revised EYFS, where we're working with children with SEND, we absolutely still have to have regard to the code of practice. So you have that really key role in the early identification. So it is important that you maintain perhaps a higher level of assessment and monitoring with those children for whom you might have a few concerns. That is going to be absolutely critical in terms of that early identification role. We can also pick up through our assessment if there is a need to signpost or refer on to other services. So that absolutely is a key part of what's flagged in the code of practice. So underlines the need for us to be taking that closer focus on assessment for children where there are any concerns. We must be following that graduated response. We need to be doing that assess, plan, do, review approach. We need to be putting in that support at SEND support before we necessarily do involve those other services. And where it comes to high needs funding and statutory assessments, those outcomes meetings that you may be involved with, annual reviews, EHCP process, there will still be a requirement for you to be able to very, very clearly pinpoint, if you like, sort of where children are in terms of their development. And at this moment in time, we would still be saying that the Early Support Developmental Journal would be the tool that we would be hoping that you'd be using, because it gives us those really clear small step breakdown, if you like, of those developmental stages for children. So we feel that that is probably going to be the tool that in the short term, at least, we will continue to recommend. So final thought, really, I think nobody would disagree with that. That's really a central aim within the EYFS, and I think where we are focusing in on that individual child, the unique child, looking at those individual ways that children learn and develop, that absolutely fits with the way that we work with those children that might need that additional support, it sort of seems to resonate really well. What we want to do, and I'm pleased that we wanted to finish sort of 10-15 minutes slightly before the end of the session, just in order for you to be able to pop any questions or comments either into the chat or put a hand up. And I think Nikki also was going to put the link into an evaluation form that we have. The idea being there is that there's very much an opportunity for you to write down any areas that you feel going forward you'd like a bit more input on, any future training or discussion sessions that you think might be useful coming into next term, because as we mentioned at the beginning, this really is the start of the whole process of the implementation of these changes, and we hope that today has been reassuring to you and useful, but we know that there could well be burning questions and things that you want to be able to follow up in the future. So I'm just going to try and stick my chat thing on now and see if there's anything coming through.
Sorry, Jay.
Hello.
Sorry, I haven't got the chat function. So is it possible for it to be sent?
The evaluation form, Emma?
Yes, please.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll make sure we send it out to everybody who was on the call as well. Then we can do it that way. Thank you. That's kind of you to say. We'll make sure we get it out to people. That's a good prompt. We've got a question about developmental journal. Just want to pick up. Is it just paper based? No, it's something that's available online. But we've actually got that particular document on our area Senko webpage, the SSE webpage, which I know that one of my really, really helpful colleagues from the team will probably pop a link in the chat for you if you like, and then you can have a look, because there's not just that resource on there, there'll be all sorts of things that hopefully you'll find useful. As far as the link with Tapestry is not something that I am as familiar with to know about whether it has that specific document on there. I know there was an SEND sort of module on Tapestry, but those of you who use it will know better than I. I don't know whether it was directly correlated with the developmental journal, to be fair. So you can certainly, oh, there we go. Yeah, you can certainly, you know, sort of download a copy of that and sort of use that more electronically if that's useful. Was just picking up Deanna's point there. Hang on. Please can you send us the right? So I missed the first bit. What I think we are doing is recording the session, so you'll be able to access it, the full, not just the slides, but the commentary as well. And the moment where I made the mistake with the slides and got a tickle in my throat, everything will be preserved for forever.
But Dino, I'll ask Gemma to send the PDF of the slides to everybody that attended.
Yeah. So we'll cover it. We'll cover all our bases. That's for sure. I mean, you may feel that you want a bit of reflection around this, and we are very happy for any of you to drop us an email or any thoughts that occur to you. In some respects, we're totally expecting that more questions and comments will arise as you get into next term and start using, start working towards curricular goals and having your team talks around this. You might come up with questions and things then. So do let us know if there's anything pressing or any comments, and your evaluation will be really useful to us, because then we can shape any further sessions, make them useful to you.
I'm going to stop recording now because I don't think this is thing. But Emma's got a hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was me talking there. So just a quick question. I haven't fully gone through the new